I would say the biggest lesson I've learned since I started was winter is not why colonies die. It's just when. You can have the best gear in the world, the perfect setup, and if you put sick bees in it, they'll die.
Buzz.
Tonight I'm going to go through a presentation on sustainability, which is a part of overwintering, the prerequisites to overwintering, and then a little bit more about Varroa mite treatment, and then I'm just going to do a demo, show you all the gear. Now, there's a reason I don't start with the gear that I'll just tell you first, and even though that's everyone's question. And the reason I don't start with gear is because you can have the best gear in the world, the perfect setup, and if you put sick bees in it, they'll die. That's why we save it for the last. Lay the foundation, then put those healthy bees in that good gear. I practice and promote sustainable beekeeping. Now, that means overwintering your existing colonies, using them to make your own queens, and then using those queens and the extra brood to make additional colonies either for growth or for replacement. It's never having to buy bees again. I haven't bought bees in 4 years. I don't think I'm going to have to do it again. I don't want to jinx myself by saying that. Something could happen, but I'm on track. This year I actually had to sell 3 colonies after winter just to get back down to a reasonable starting number. And I don't think that that is beyond your reach. So now you get the disclaimers. I do not have all of the answers. There are a lot of longtime beekeepers here in Alaska that know a lot more about summer beekeeping than I'll ever know. Nobody has all the answers. We're all learning every year. The bees read different books than us. They do different things than we expect, and every year is adjusting. The reason I'm here doing this presentation is because I've had excellent overwintering success, and it's getting better. Now, a lot of that is because I had a really good start. I had excellent mentors. I'm very curious, I've done a lot of research, and I'm really dedicated to the idea of not having to get new bees from California every year. My methods, which I'll talk about, and I'll do the demo later, are a work in progress. I tweak them all the time based on how the last tweak went, feedback from other people, and just what I see. And it's a little different every year. I overwinter outside. I know some people overwinter inside in climate-controlled building and have good results. I know some people say they get them through every year in their garage. I don't know how the garage is set up. I don't know anything about overwintering inside. I'm so happy that people do that. I'm not interested. Your hives weigh the most in the fall after you fed them up. I don't want to pick them up and haul them somewhere. I want to set it up. I want it to be easy on the beekeeper and on the bees. I don't want to argue with people that do things differently. If you've had success, I want to learn from them. And I'm not satisfied. I want to get 90% through every winter on a consistent basis. That's my personal goal. This is my history. First year, I started with 2. I did a split, turned them into 3. Went into winter with them, and all 3 made it through the winter. I thought, man, this is so easy. And I didn't know it then that all my colonies were doomed. They were all sick by midsummer, and most were dead by November the next year. I expanded because I thought I was so good. Got up to 6. I actually got up to like 9, condensed down to 6, and lost them all. The next winter, I got 11 and 12 through the winter. And the difference between the previous years, I experimented treating with mites during broodless periods. The next year, I thought, now we're in Alaska, our bees don't interact with other bees that much. Do I really have to treat for mites? Do I really have to be vigilant about it? And all my bees got so sick. I keep bees up on the roof of 49th State warehouse. It's not on the roof of this building. It's on their warehouse where they make beer, which is down in Ship Creek. So if you get up on the deck here and look, or anywhere downtown and look out towards Ship Creek, you'll see those colonies on the warehouse roof. You see everything on the roof, things you don't see in your yard. Every bee that crawls, I see. And bees were crawling all over the roof. They were so sick, and I had deformed wing virus really badly. And I did my best. I got 6 of 10 through the winter, which was a miracle, because when I got mite drops of well over 1,000, you know. The next year, I got 12 of 14 through, and the year after that, 14 of 18. I should have gotten a few more through last year. I didn't quite condense them enough in the fall. So all in all, 73%, but the last 2 years, 81%. We're gonna get to 90. I think all of us are gonna get to 90. So the barriers to sustainability in Alaska are climate, right? Has anyone noticed that climate is an issue up here? Long winters and cold winters for different reasons. There are lots of places that have winters as cold as ours. There are not a lot of places that have winters as long as ours. Our bees, the last pollen and nectar available to them is really mid-August, really. And it's not available again until April. That's a long time, and it's a long time to go without flying. And let's face it, we really mean to go without pooping. So one of the biggest barriers to sustainability here has been the lack of information about northern climate bees, lack of research. Now, there was a lot of research, and it still persists today, where people will tell you things about bees that are based on research done in temperate climates in 3/4 inch wood hives. And all of that is valid for 3/4 inch hives. It is not valid for insulated hives, whether you're using poly hives or whether you have an external insulation strategy. And the behavior changes dramatically. Etienne Tardif was just a revolutionary about the things that he discovered with his persistence and curious mind. And almost all YouTube channels involve beekeeping in southern places. That's what inspired me to do the YouTube channel here. They can get away with murder down there. They can do 1-frame splits, you know, they can do splits super late in the year, you know, they can put in these, like they have these 2-frame nukes they get through the winter. Winter, right, June. Another barrier to sustainability here is that just a bad culture, a bad tradition. You know, 40 years ago, people tried to get their bees through the winter in Alaska, and they got about 50% of them through it. That changed over time, and part of that was the spread of Varroa mites made it much more difficult. And part of that is that we were trying to do things with old-fashioned methods and old-fashioned gear, and really that's wood boxes. And not being aware of the dynamics of the colony. We'll talk about that. So what happens is, as people stopped trying to get them through the winter, it sort of became known that you couldn't get them through the winter. And so then people taught beekeeping classes. One of the things they'd say is, don't try to get them through the winter. I had so many people tell me that. Oh, bees are great, but don't try to get them through the winter. It just doesn't work. And they did their best, but you know, if you have substandard gear and you're not using the proper methods, it's very difficult to get a colony through the winter. And so they tried, and then the bees died, and then they decided that it was true what they'd been told after all, you can't get bees through the winter. Yeah, there's nothing more heartbreaking than that little graphic of all the dead bees, and that's last survivor cluster, the last couple hundred. Genetics are a big barrier to sustainability here. All our bees come from California, although we get a few queens from other places. And the package suppliers do not selectively breed for the traits that are important to us, which would be winter hardiness and mite resistance and virus resistance. What they do is they want bees that brood up really fast so that they can get them on almonds in the spring and then make packages to send us. That's what they want. Also, some popular strains, like Italians, are heavily promoted, even though they do not overwinter as well as other colonies, as other types of bees. Well, I would say the biggest lesson I've learned since I started was winter is not why colonies die. It's not. And when you hear, if it was, then that statement would be correct. The bees can't go through the winter in Alaska. It's just when. So we have to take care of the things, put the colony in position to survive something that they genetically, most of them genetically, are able to do. Now, I talked about Italian bees a little while ago. There are people that get Italian bees through the winter, and there's also lots of different versions of Italians. You know, there are Italians some people get from Canada, and there are Italians people get from Texas. You know, those bees are experiencing different things. They're adapting in different ways. So don't focus on winter as the problem. Focus on these things. Healthy colony. Healthy bees are amazingly resilient. They do great under adverse conditions. Adequate insulation. I think people who try to overwinter in just wood have less than 10% success rate. You always find people, hey, I got them all the way through winter. It does happen, but it's, you know, sometimes you win the lottery too. If you were going to set out to give yourself a chance to do it, why pick the thing that occasionally sometimes works? Set yourself up and your bees up for success. A fall feeding strategy, that's really important, we'll talk about it, and a winter feeding strategy. That picture, by the way, is me adding sugar in February to one of my colonies. Lifting up the reflectix, popping in a little more sugar. So, winter bees are the key. Summer bees, living 6 to 8 weeks. That's how it is from, our bees start to brood up in April, and they brood through mid-October. That's when the last of the winter brood emerges. To get through the winter, they have to have a sufficient population of healthy winter bees. So how do we do that? Sounds so easy. Well, we have to understand Varroa mites, at least understand the threat that they pose. They are the #1 reason colonies don't survive. It's not the gear, it's not the winter, it's the mites. It's what makes bees sick, and as I started, put sick bees in the best gear you've got, they are not going to survive winter. Sick bees can't raise healthy bees. A sick bee is transmitting viruses to the brood they're feeding, or to other bees when they do trophallaxis, which is feeding each other. They're unable to perform basic colony functions like foraging and raising brood, and here's the killer, they have a shorter lifespan. So in the summer, our bees only live 6 weeks anyway. You shorten that lifespan, and everything about the colony collapses. In the winter, they have to live about 250 to 60 days in order to live long enough to raise the next summer's population of summer bees. Because they can't just live long enough that the eggs are laid. They have to live long enough for the first round of brood, first several rounds of brood to be laid, larvae emerge, and age into forager status. So, it takes 21 days for a worker egg to hatch into an adult. It takes another 3 weeks before they before they age into forager status. So, about 52 days before they're foraging. The Varroa population peaks in August. Our bee population peaks in July. All of your colonies are getting smaller right now. Doesn't seem like it, does it? They're all getting smaller. The queens have cut back on laying. That's the natural course of things. Slowly at first, but it'll progress. The mite population is exploding. They're reproducing underneath the caps on the larvae. And this is a great graph from Randy Oliver. It just shows what I want you to. The important part of this is that more and more bees in your colony are impacted by the viruses that the Varroa are transmitting. So the way that works is bees evolved with many of these viruses, but before Varroa mites, the only way that they were ingested, or the only way they were accessed was they were ingested. But Varroa mites, they pry themselves between the plates, and they stick their proboscis in, and think of them like a dirty needle. That's how they're transmitting these diseases. And a honeybee's immune system is essentially its gut. And so it's okay at managing pathogens that are ingested, but when they're injected, They do not have a defense for it. And that's why mites are so devastating to bees. Eventually, they're going to adapt to it. But that has not happened to a large degree yet. So, right when we need them to raise a healthy, strong population of winter bees, they're the sickest. That's the problem. So our job is to make sure that doesn't happen. The problems become apparent usually in late summer. Deformed wing virus. How many people have seen deformed wing virus on your bees when you're doing inspections? That's all? How many people have never seen deformed wing virus? You're not looking for it. Deformed wing virus has always been present in colonies. It's just way worse with Varroa mites. It's more virulent. The wings are shriveled, like deformed, you know. Where you see them, and this is where I have an advantage, on the roof, they can't fly. So on the roof, I see them crawling. You don't see them in your yard. Crawling bees, if you have a high number of them, are an indication that they're sick. Spotty brood pattern, so where you'll just see, and this is different than if it's backfilled. And many of you this summer, because there was so much nectar, would see a pattern like this, except that every cell that wasn't capped would have nectar in it. That's a different kind of problem. It's not from illness, it's an overabundance of a resource. But when they're empty, or maybe they have, this is a spotty brood pattern from disease. The other thing that happens, and this is because they're getting sick towards the end of the summer, is you'll find that they're not capping the honey. It'll just take forever for it. And then you'll start feeding them sugar syrup and they won't cap the sugar syrup. And the reason is because your population is crashing. It's not always evident from the top when you look down, but if you're looking from the bottom, you'll see your population is dropping. Not enough bees to create the heat that's necessary to do this, and they're living shorter and shorter. They're dying sooner and sooner. So what happens if they don't raise any winter bees is they're dead before Christmas. And you have this big giant pile of bees on your bottom board. How many people have seen that? Yeah. Sometimes they'll raise some winter bees, but they'll be sick. And so they basically steadily decline. The last few hundred will be balled up and dead, frozen, starved. Either one is kind of 6 one, half a dozen the other. But essentially, this tells you, it doesn't mean you didn't have enough bees. It means you didn't have enough healthy bees. So, I was trying to figure out how to do this, and I thought, why not ask a bad question? What's the ideal number of boxes to go into winter with? You guys have all heard conversations like this, right? And there are answers that are known, right? Yeah. So what? How many boxes do you go into winter with? One. Well, you heard one. You've been listening to the wrong guy. She's listening to me. A lot of people say you need 2 deeps plus a super full of honey over their heads. That is old-fashioned Tennessee thinking. What you need to do is be much more nuanced at how you look at the problem. You need to ask this question. How much space will each individual colony need in 2 weeks, or 4 weeks, or 6 weeks? It's the same question all summer long. When you're looking at your bees in May, your bees have a little bit of room, and 10 days later, they want to swarm. Because you're trying to look at the population and estimate where they'll be in 2 weeks. Well, here's how you estimate the bee population. Spring, summer, fall, it's the same thing. You look from the top, how many bees do you have? Count frames of bees. That's the currency of beekeeping, counting. Count frames of bees, and what you're really doing is counting the gaps between the frames. This one on the left has like 5 frames of bees, maybe 4.5, something like that. The one on the right, that's 10 frames of bees. Sometimes we'll have 10 frames plus an inch of crawling bees across the top, right? Those are nice hives. Then you look from the bottom. How many of you guys look from the bottom at your colonies? Yeah, good for you. That's exactly right. Because it's warmer. They go up to the top. It's a different view from the bottom. If you're looking at the bottom, this top one, and you're seeing bees all across the bottom, and this, sometimes, they're it's a solid mass on the bottom. That's a good solid, that's a box full of bees. That one on the left looked pretty full from the top. On the bottom, it looks like it's got what? 3 frames of bees maybe? 2.5 or 3 frames of bees? Now that's not too bad in June, but that colony is going to die if you're looking at it in August. You're going to have to take action if you want to get that colony through. So you figure out how many bees you've got, how many frames of bees, and then you look at what time of year it is. This is a great Randy Oliver chart. What you're seeing is the population of bees over the course of a season. So the bluish, purplish, my wife was laughing at me trying to describe colors. Those are winter bees. You see how they die out and they're replaced by the brighter colors, which are the summer bees during the season, and then the winter bees start showing up again in the fall. Now, this chart is really breaking it down by age, but that's the equivalent of winter bees. Look, and the timing is a little different because this is Manitoba. Now, Manitoba is in Canada, but it's still way down south compared to where we are. And so their season is a little different, plus they have a really nice late flow. So if you move that peak back to somewhere in the first part of July and then make your adjustments, look what's happening to the population of bees. It's plummeting. And when I talk about condensing later, people often tell me, I can't condense this hive. They were jam-packed full 3 weeks ago. And look what's going to happen to your jam-packed hive. And this is a healthy colony. This is not a sick colony that's crashing. It's the natural population drop. Now, do you know why they cut back on brood rearing? It's a wintering strategy. It's a survival strategy. The colony wants a lot of foragers when they're gathering winter food, but they want a limited number consuming it because they need it to last. Okay? So naturally, that is going to drop precipitously like that. So this is, I basically did rough percentages of the drops and rough percentages of the timeline. If you have 40,000 bees in your colony on July 1st, even in a healthy colony, it's going to be about 24,000 September 1st and 15,000 November 1st. So this should not be a secret to you after this. When you look at your colony, don't look at how they are, look at how they're going to be. It will help you with planning. Here's another one for the more, if you want to plug in however many bees you think you have. If you want to go out there and count individual bees, that's awesome, but I'll leave that to the graduate students that are trying to write their doctorate on this stuff. 100%, think of it as 100% on July 1st, 60% September 1st, and 35% on November 1st. So, you guys who have 2 full deeps of bees right now, you're only going to have 35% of those on November 1st. So the implications, we can manage for that if we know it's coming. We can't manage for it if we're surprised by it. So, condense them. Condense them in August. In August, the population will have dropped a lot, not nearly as much as it's going to. And you want, even in insulated gear, you want those bees to be as tight as possible. Now, it's not swarm season. You are never going to have to worry about your bees swarming in late August or September or October. They're just not going to do it. So they're going the other way and they know it. Their populations are declining. In fact, at its height, you're losing 600 bees a day in the fall. 600 more are dying than are emerging. And it's the same on the other end, by the way, in that spring buildup, 600 more a day are emerging than are dying. So that's why you get that amazing population growth where they look fine 1 week and they're ready to swarm 10 days later. That's why that's going on. So if you reduce the space, and by space I mean the hive volume. So 2 deeps has, I don't know, it would be kind of cool if I could tell you the liters or square inches or stuff, but you're not going to get that from me. But it's a lot of space. It's a lot more space than what that colony is going to need when you get time to condense. If you put them in a smaller space, they manage the temperature better, they manage the humidity better. You make it easier for them to to heat, and so there's less metabolic stress. Essentially, if they have to heat constantly all winter long, you have mortality. It wears them out. And they consume less resources. Etienne Tardif's bees in Yukon territories in Canada, which has 6 weeks consecutive, often of 40 below weather, his bees consume 25 to 30 pounds of sugar all winter. That's all. Now, some of you may have heard that your hive has to weigh like 100 pounds or 120 pounds. That's true if they're in wood. Not if they're insulated. That's the difference. So here's how I condense. I count the frame of bees, and I remove, and you know, let's say we have 10 frame boxes. So if I'm counting 8 or more frames of bees in each box in August, I'm pretty good. I usually will still pull out the outside frames and add follower boards. And I'll talk more about follower boards in a bit. You also want to remove insufficiently drawn frames. You guys have all seen frames where, like they may have drawn it out. It's shallow. They didn't get it as deep as it needed, and they'll still put sugar syrup in it and cap it sometimes, but it's not a full-size cone. You need to get those out of there. They can't efficiently heat themselves in those cones. You want them to have the best full-drawn frames in that box. Bees' heating strategy is to crawl into those cells when they're empty, when they don't have food in them. They crawl into those cells, 1 bee per cell, and then the other bees cluster around them, and then they essentially shiver to create friction. They can't do that in empty space, and that's what a blank frame is. All your frames that didn't get drawn need to come out. They can't do that in frames that are too shallow. Some of you might have frames that warped. You might not look for it, but look for it now. Sometimes, especially with deep frames, they'll warp, and so you have a shallow side and a deep side. The deep side is too deep to raise brood in, so they'll put food in it, and the shallow side is too shallow to do anything. But if you have a frame like that, yeah, get rid of it now, because it's not a good wintering frame. And then replace the outside frames with follower boards. And drone comb. If you have a lot of drone comb, now drone comb looks just bigger cells. It's very distinct if you look at it. Is anybody here who doesn't recognize drone comb? I could go into details later if you want me to, but that is also inefficient for heating because it doesn't fit that 1 bee tightly. And so move those to the outside. You want the center of the nest to be filled with good worker comb. It can have some drone comb in it, but just not a lot, just not like a whole solid slab of it. Those need to be on the outside where they can store resources on them. They'll put sugar syrup there, but they're going to use those center ones to mainly stay warm. Now, a follower board, a lot of times down south they make them out of wood. I like to make them out of foam insulation. They work, we'll put some in after the break, but they're the size of a frame, and you just slide them in. I like mine to pressure fit on the sides so that I don't have to worry about them dropping, and I don't have to worry about doing anything fancy on the top to replicate the ears on a frame, you know, that come out on both sides that hang. Just like to fit it in and form fit it. What that does is it gives them less space to heat. It's a matter of debate for people that read about bees or that keep bees in other states about whether you really need to insulate them. You know, and I mean, if you look at that wood, that 3/4 inch wood with an R value of less than 1, and imagine what it's like in that weather and how hard those bees are working to stay warm. They're working hard. So the fact is that insulated colonies stay warmer, much, much warmer. And they consume less food, which we talked about. Hey, and I put in a duplicate. I like this one a lot better. It's got a great picture of a dead bee and some sugar. I mean, you know, so, you know. Yeah. So we used to think that bees only heat the cluster, not the entire hive. That's that traditional not research not done in a northern place, it's done in wood. And you see that, when I look at pictures like this, and I've seen a few on the, on the Facebook page, those bees look cold to me. Anybody else think they look cold? You know, when I open my hives, my bees are all crawling around all over the place. I never see them look like this, ever. These are cold bees. Now we know that they only cluster together tightly in wooden boxes. In poly, just their resting metabolism keeps the temperature warm enough most of the winter. Not in the extreme times, but most of the winter, just their resting metabolism keeps them warm. I've got a graph on that. Here it is. So this is, it's not the best colony I had, but this shows how these colonies are keeping this temperature. And my temperature sensors, I really like putting temperature sensors in my colonies. And I'm not gonna say I was lazy, I just procrastinated putting my temperature sensors in until everything was set up and I remembered them. And so I didn't want to open up the hive again in September to do it. And so I just peeled back a corner and stuck them in. So my temperature sensors were in one corner. I put one in the middle to compare, and there's about 8 to 10 degrees difference in the corner than in the center of the hive. So this shows them keeping the temperature pretty close to 50, drops down around 40 when it gets really cold, all winter long. Well, this is just June. This is a short piece of winter. This is, a month. But we had some weather below zero, and then we had some really bad 20 below weather. Everybody that's watching this from Fairbanks is laughing their heads off, but I said really bad 20 below. But I noticed that my colonies, they got colder than they'd ever gotten. I saw the temperature drop down into the low 40s. And I thought, oh man, whenever I've seen that before, they've died. But then I thought, wait a minute, that's 60 plus degrees warmer than it is outside. They sound like they're doing okay. And the way colony behavior works is they don't start to cluster until it's 50 or 55 degrees. Really, I'd say 50. Inside the box, not outside, inside the box. And their resting metabolism keeps it above that almost all winter. And that's why they use less food, because they're not having to heat. Anybody bought a furnace or a wood stove lately? It's the first thing they ask you when you're buying one. How many square feet is your house, right? You gotta match the heater to the space in your house. Your bee colony is the same way. If you have a furnace in an uninsulated house, you can heat it up to a point, but it uses a lot of fuel. And it puts a lot of stress on the furnace. It never shuts off, right? It has to go constantly. And if the house is poorly insulated, at some point, only the areas nearest to the furnace, nearest to where the output is anyway, are warm. And in extreme cold, even they get cold. That's exactly what's going on in your hives. So this kind of bridges together several comments. One is that you want as many bees as possible going into winter in that space. So we shrink it. We remove extra boxes, we remove frames, replace them with follower boards. And here's my spiel for insulation. They don't need it just in winter. The key functions of colonies all require heat. Raising brood, making wax, distributing propolis, and reducing nectar to honey. All those things take heat. So if you add insulation permanently, which is what a polybox is, you get more brood, especially early and late in the season. You get more drawn comb and faster. You get more propolis, which is good for two reasons. One is it helps them seal the cracks, and the other is propolis is a part of their immune system. It's kind of cool the way it works, but the more many beekeepers encourage propolis deposits on the side of their hive because it helps with colony health. And you get more honey. You get more honey because you have more brood and you have more comb to put it in. It all goes together. I saw a really cool study that I could not find. Again, it drove me crazy. But it said that in an insulated hive, an insulated colony with one queen makes as much honey, was it as much or more? It was one or the other, than a 2-queen hive in a wood box. And that's the power of insulation. Heat makes everything else work better. What are the permanent insulation disadvantages? Costs more money, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit later. I know some of you have wood gear. I know poly is expensive and beekeeping is expensive in general. So there are strategies you can use to add insulation to wood. It's difficult in the summer, but you can certainly do it in the spring. You can begin earlier in the winter than you would think, and you can continue it. And you can continue it later in the summer than you think. Essentially, it's as long as you can be in 1 or 2 boxes, as long as you don't have to be removing boxes for active management, you can have that insulation on there. There's a lot of external insulation strategies. I'm not going to cover them in detail. Tar paper is not insulation and won't work. Does it warm them up in the sun? Yes. How much sun do we get in the winter? No. The amount that it warms them up in the sun is more than compensated for by how long it's dark and losing temps. So you're not doing anything with tar paper. The one on the right, they're at least trying to put insulation on the sides and above. You lose 75% of your heat from the top, right? So they're trying to put it up there, but look at all that wood that's leaking out all that heat on the sides. And I love this one on the bottom. I saw this, it just cracks me up. Like, I know that some really crafty person was so proud that they created this, but what's that gonna do as soon as it gets wet? The main thing about fall is you wanna keep them rearing brood into September. And they're going to store syrup on the outside frames in August, and then gradually backfill the brood nest in late August and early September. A lot of the research says store 50 to 70 pounds, and depending on the gear and the weather, and I think that's about right. The main thing is you want to end feeding by mid-September, and so that all of the syrup is capped before October. Now, this is one of the toughest things people get behind, like they go moose hunting, stuff. You gotta get that feed on them early. And the main part of that is to start it on time. As it gets cooler in the fall, the flowers stop producing as much nectar. You see the flowers. I have this argument every fall. People go, I still see flowers. My bees are still bringing in nectar. And I'm looking at my supers, and they're lighter this week than the week before. I go, they're not bringing in nectar. They go, I see flowers. I go, I don't see supers being filled. You want to believe your eyes? Well, I guess it's both of them, your eyes. But a lot of people also say things like, I always harvest honey on August 10th. It's not our calendar, it's their calendar. It's the flowers calendar. 2 years ago, you remember how hot it was, how awesome it was in May and June and the first part of July? And then you remember how it rained the whole rest of the year? I harvested honey July 5th because it was done. The flowers dried up, there was no more nectar. So here's the problem with that. If you don't harvest honey on time, you can't feed them while you have the honey supers on. It's not ethical to sell sugar syrup mixed with honey as honey. You can eat it if you want, but you don't want to sell it. Not that your goal should be to sell honey, but most people sell a little bit when they, because it's really hard to go through that much yourself. Maybe some of you have more friends than I do and you can give it away. But when the nectar dries up, the bees consider that a dearth. And so we want our bees to respond to environmental cues. We want them to slow down brood rearing when there aren't as many resources available, because otherwise they'll eat themselves out of house and home and starve to death in August. I've seen it before. So harvesting honey on time means you can start feeding them. And I know, you know how people always say feed 2 to 1 in the fall? Yes, but first feed 1 to 1, because the first task is to get them to raise winter bees. So when you feed them, when you start feeding them, you're not feeding them for winter storage yet. You're feeding them for winter brood raising. Okay? So when you take that honey up, get them started on 1 to 1. I give them, you know, like a full-size hive can go through a gallon of feed in a week. And I'm giving them like 1.5 gallons or 1.25 gallons or something like that. Every hive's different, right? They're different sizes. But I'm feeding them slightly more than, well, enough to know that they will still see it as a time of abundance, and they will continue raising brood. And that's when it's really important to put a pollen patty on there. We have beautiful weather in August sometimes, but it's not beautiful for as many hours, is it? So the foraging time, even on a nice day, is more limited. And this is also a climate is a little different. I'm in Anchorage, and if you're in the valley, that 2 to 3 degree difference is huge, huge in terms of the amount of pollen and nectar that those flowers can produce. So the season is a little different. Do not add an extra box for winter stores. Anybody heard that you have to have a whole box of food above their heads for them to make it through winter? Yeah. Okay, no. Adding space puts them at a disadvantage. You want the food that they store in their box to be the food they consume in the winter. And they can do it. And we talked about this before, their population is shrinking. So adding space right when their population is shrinking, that's like buying a bigger house after you retire. It's like, there's something wrong with that scenario. So here's what people always want: dates. I can't give you dates, but I gotta give you dates because you'll pester me if I don't. The 3rd week of August, is a good time to switch to 2-to-1 syrup for winter storage. So you want to stop feeding pollen patties about then too. This is one of the interesting things. The lack of pollen is one of the things that stimulates the raising of winter brood. So give them pollen patties in mid-August, in early August for sure, in the middle of August. But sometime 3rd or 4th week of August is when you want to get off that. And you want to stop feeding by early to mid-September because you want them to have a chance to cap it all. The term, I believe, is hydroscopic. Honey is hydroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture. Uncapped honey emits moisture. And you want to make it as easy on them as possible to manage the moisture in your hive. You want to stop feeding when they stop taking the syrup or when the colony is heavy enough. All the new beekeepers hate it when I say that. How do I know if it's heavy enough? You got to start figuring it out now. Go out and tilt your hive back and see how heavy it feels. Don't lift it. That'll break your back. Just tilt it back. It's good practice to be in anyway because you want to look in from underneath and see what the population is. Tilt it back and see what the weight is. When they start putting on weight from that sugar syrup, you will really feel it. And when it's a load to lift, you're done. It'll make sense, trust me. All right. Managing mites is a really important part of why I have success with overwintering bees, but I don't like it. I don't want to treat them. I don't like it. It's like the way natural selection should work is that there's this new pest or pathogen that's introduced, and the species, it wipes out the weak, and then the strong survive, and then they procreate, and then they reach some kind of symbiosis where they can manage to live with the pests. That's how it ought to work. But Varroa is different. Varroa is different in the way we talked about before. It bypasses the honeybee's natural immune system with the viruses they transfer. The mites are bad enough with the parasitizing the adults and the larvae, but the viruses they transmit are what's really bad. Only 1 to 2% of colonies have mite-resistant traits. When I first started, I was like, oh, treatment-free, I'm not going to do anything. I'll just breed from the ones that are strong. If 2% of the colonies, only 2% are mite-resistant, I got to order 50 of them to have a chance to have one. It's just not realistic. It takes thousands of colonies and years of selective breeding where you use only the best of the best of the best and keep breeding them together to be able to do that. So we do not have Varroa resistant stock in Alaska, but this summer, myself and a couple other beekeepers imported some Varroa resistant stock from Michigan. So it's to get the double whammy, winter hardy and Varroa resistant. And we've got them in hives now, and we're going to get them through the winter. And if they go well, then our plan is to make our plan is to make this stock available to club members. Now, we're not going to wean ourselves off of, our virgins still have to fly out and mate with stock that does not have the same genetics. So it's going to be reduced somewhat, right? But some is better than none. And if we get established, then we can try to spread those genetics. It'll make all of our lives easier. So I think it's great. Now, I do treat with oxalic acid. It's a plant-based. It's not synthesized in a laboratory. It does not persist in wax or honey. And the vapor treatment, which is what I use, does not harm brood. Oxalic acid drip does harm brood, so you only do it when there's no brood. Okay, oxalic acid is what gives rhubarb its tang. It's in spinach, a number of them. It basically gets superheated, turns into a gas, goes throughout the hive, it crystallizes on all of the surfaces, and for reasons we don't know, it kills mites. We don't know. We think it's because they get it under their feet, they somehow absorb it through their feet. There's something about it that is inconsistent with their metabolism. But it works, and it doesn't hurt the bees. But it's dangerous for us when it's in its vapor form. It's not dangerous to us once it crystallizes. So if you use this, you want to protect yourself. Do not take a shortcut. Have a quality respirator, a full face respirator, and watch the YouTube video on how to make sure it fits right. Don't say, I'll just wear glasses. It's like saying, I only want a little acid in my eyes. Is anybody here that would be happy with that? Don't do it. Don't do it. The commercial beekeepers that do this, they fire anybody that doesn't wear the right gear because they don't want to assume the responsibility because it's so dangerous. But within a few minutes, like 10 at the outside, it's all crystallized. It's fine. You don't have to wear protective gloves. It's not dangerous because it's not going into not getting in your eyes. You don't want to swallow a handful of it, but handling the frames or the gear is not a problem. You don't have to worry about that. The main thing is that oxalic acid vapor only kills mites that are not under the capped brood. Varroa mites reproduce on the larvae, or on the pupa. Just they cap the larvae, day 10, they pupate, spin a cocoon, metamorphize, remember 8th grade biology, and then come out adult just like butterflies, just like caterpillars turn into butterflies. Except then there's those Varroa mites, and one Varroa mite in, about 2.5 out on a worker bee. With a drone, 4 or more out. They reproduce very effectively on drones because 3 more days. Drones take 3 more days to hatch. That's the advantage. So we treat them when there's no capped brood. Now, that means if you requeen, like if you had a swarm and you requeen, then you have a period of time where the last queen's brood has all emerged and the new queen's brood hasn't been capped yet. Great time to treat with oxalic acid vapor. In October, when all winter bees emerged, I always treat my colonies in October. And if you have a swarm, you can always treat, or swarms and packages are about the same if you catch them. You treat them 7 or 8 days after the queen starts laying. The larvae get capped on day 10, so that's your window. You just have to do it beforehand. And when there's no capped brood, it's about a 90 to 95% effectiveness. So it's expensive, the gear to treat with oxalic acid. Nathan sells it. I highly recommend you work together as a team. One of the things I am trying to promote is a beekeeping community. I'm not making money here. You guys, every single penny you paid to get in here tonight goes to me. That's how much money I make in beekeeping. I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it because the people who tell people that they need to kill their bees made me angry. And because I like the sense of community. And that's how people do it in like America. You know, and so if you get together with somebody and you can go in on this gear together, you make it more affordable. There are people in the clubs, depending on where you are, that will come out and help you. Sometimes there's a fee charge. Sometimes it's like cookies or a beer. We can work all that out. But treating your bees, That's what helped me more than anything. That's how I got up to over 2%, whatever it is. Over 80%. And I'm guessing you guys will all be happy with 80%, right? So what I didn't tell you is, I came out of winter last year with 10. I built up to somewhere in the low 20s in the summer, and then I condensed back down to 18 going into winter. So it's not like it's a constant number. If you get good at taking care of bees and keeping them healthy, your problem is too many bees. It's not, will I get them through the winter? It's, will I have too many in the spring? That's your problem. All right, so yes, that's a great idea, right? All right, so I'm gonna go through and just do a demo now of how I put my gear together. We're ready for the gear section. Drone culling is a very effective way of managing Varroa mites. You can buy drone frames that have a different pattern on them. They're bigger cells, and the bees know they will lay them up with just drones. You can wait until they cap those larvae and then take it home and pop it in the freezer for a day or two, and then let it thaw and put it back in the hive. And they clean it out, and the queen lays it up again, and it's rinse and repeat every couple weeks. Remember how I said they're more effective at reproducing in drones? They know that, and the drones are like magnets for Varroa. And so drone culling, pulling those frames out and popping in the freezer, I've been doing that this summer instead of oxalic acid as sort of an experiment. This is my summer experiment. I've been very vigilant about it. I don't have a single crawling bee on the roof. My colonies are doing great. So I'll talk more about that at some other time in some other video, but I highly recommend buying drone frames. They're green. They have a special color, they're green, and popping them in there about the first week of May, and they'll draw it out, and the queens will lay them up, and you just manage them that way. Okay. I use a screen bottom board. It's 10 to 15% reduction in Varroa mites. That's not enough. It's not nearly enough by itself, but when you combine it with other methods called integrated pest management, it's a nice addition. I don't know why. I guess the mites fall down through and can't get back. They're pretty mobile, but you see them, it's kind of scary how mobile they are, but for some reason, there's a reduction. All right, that's one reason. The other reason is that, so there's two more reasons. One is that it creates a little dead air pocket beneath it. You do not need ventilation. You do not need ventilation. Ventilation is a myth, okay? It's a myth. A natural beehive has an opening about 2 square inches, and that's it. It doesn't have a board in the top that absorbs moisture. It doesn't have extra stuff. So I put my screen bottom boards over a solid surface. For me, it's plywood, okay? No air coming from below. And it creates a dead air space that helps with some thermodynamic aspects of how they manage winter, and I'm not smart enough to understand why, but Etienne says it and I believe it. So I think we ought to too. The third reason is when I used to use a wand for oxalic acid vapor, sticking a wand in through an opening, I never wanted to do that. You burn bees, wax is flammable, don't do that. And anyway, so I just propped up the hive a little bit and slid the wand underneath the screen bottom board. Oxalic acid comes right through the screen, works perfectly, works great. Just block off the sides. I usually don't have my wife here when I'm telling these stories. I used our old Hawaii beach towels to block off the space. Like, they're cheap, especially now. All right, so that's why I use a screen bottom board. So if you have like the poly screen bottom boards, and they have those scallops on the bottom, close them up, take both sides of the scallops. You don't want any airflow from below. It's a myth that they need that. It doesn't happen anyway, yes?
So you can use the wooden bottom board with your polystyrene?
Yes, dogs and cats can live together. Yeah, it works great. I started out with all poly bottom boards, and then I thought, wait a minute, they're expensive and heat rises, so why am I insulating the bottom? And so I made my own. They're really easy to make. We're counting bees from the top, right? Let's say that we have, let's just run through a couple quick scenarios. Let's say I have 5 frames of bees in both boxes. What do you think I should do?
Consolidate.
Yeah, I only need 1 box. That's 10 frames of bees, that's 1 box, right? If I have 6 frames of bees in both boxes, I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna add, I'm gonna crowd them. I'm just gonna shake the bees off of 2 of them. They're gonna be a little crowded. Their population is dropping. They will not be as crowded in a few weeks. They'll be fine. When you see beekeepers, commercial beekeepers doing this down south, they condense them and these bees are just boiling out the front, you know? But they know they're gonna get them down. Now they have a different agenda. Like Ian Stepler, I love watching Ian Stepler. A lot of really fascinating stuff. He's got a blog called, or a YouTube channel called A Canadian Beekeeper. And the problem with him is he's all commercial. It doesn't apply to backyard beekeeping, a lot of it. But they have to get bees down to 1 box because they can't put, they only have limited indoor, they winter indoor in wood. And they don't have enough space to put 2 boxes. So they, for practical purposes, they have to get them down to 1. But he has these giant colonies. He still gets them down to 1. Is Brooke still here? Brooke? Hey, Brooke. Brooke had a colony last year I went to help her with.
Yep.
Holy Toledo. Now there are colonies that break the rule, and it was the hugest colony I've ever seen. They went through winter in 2, right? There is no getting those guys down to 1. It just wasn't happening. But it's the only one I've ever seen like that. I overwinter in 2 mediums, which is like a deep and a third. All right, so let's say I have 8 frames of bees. Well, I will pull out 2 frames in both boxes and put follower boards in. Now I'll center them, so I put them in both sides. Follower board, follower board. So I just shrunk my box from 10 frames to 8 frames. And now my 16 frames of bees are in there nice and snug. They're gonna reduce, right? They're gonna reduce another whatever percent. I had it up there, I don't remember it. They're gonna reduce another 20% or so, but that's okay. We're gonna reduce them down to the space they need. We're gonna do this in August. We don't wanna do it late. We don't wanna do it late. We don't wanna get into the hive late. We don't wanna break the propolis seals because once it gets cool, they can't distribute the propolis. That takes heat. It takes heat outside the hive to collect it. It takes heat inside to get it done. So you wanna not break that propolis seal. Don't do any inspections unless there's something horribly wrong after the 2nd or 3rd week of August. I usually don't look in again. If they look strong at that point, you're good. If they look weak at that point, yeah, you might want to take a peek. But you don't have to open them up and go frame by frame. Never do frame by frame anymore at that late. But you could lift them up together. If you have 2 media boxes, they stick them together. You just lift up the bottom and they stay together quite nicely. You can see how they're doing. If you look in and they had 10 frames of bees 2 weeks ago and they got 4 frames of bees today, well, you'd have to take some sort of emergency action. That's true. Do I lift them from the front or the back? It depends on if they're flying or not. If it's a cool morning, I really like to go work bees in the fall in the morning before they fly, and then I'll lift them from the front because when you set the box down, it doesn't squish any that come out to explore. But if they're flying and you lift them from the front, they take a greater exception to it. So I lift them from the back and I try to do it fast, and sometimes I'll smoke them back out of the way. So it doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. So I use Reflectix only inner covers. We've got a bunch of them over here that are available for you if you want to take them. Wooden inner covers are the weak link in your insulation. If you look at a house, if you're driving down the road in the wintertime here in Alaska and you look at a house and the snow isn't real deep, you can see all the rafter lines, right? That's because that's where the heat is leaking out. It's not leaking out between them where the insulation is. The rafters, even though they're 10, 12 inches thick, that's where the heat is going. Your wooden inner cover is the same way. So with poly and with wood, the edges don't match perfectly. They look like they do, but they don't. And so when you put a piece of Reflectix on here, it forms a perfect gasket. Squishes down and does a great seal all the way around. And it has some insulative value, not a lot, but a little bit that reflects that heat down. And I'll tell you what, when you Tom's different, but for me, the first time I used a Reflectix inner cupboard, I had to peel it back to do an inspection, and it just kind of peels back slowly like that. No cracking, no popping, no prying, bees don't get mad at me. I just thought, oh my gosh. I would say, I'm not exaggerating, of all the things I've done, Reflectix inner covers made beekeeping easier in every way. In every way. I'll never go back. And notice that it has a hole in the middle. I set out a top feeder that I did not bring. So, you want to use a rapid feeder in the fall. You don't want to use a jar feeder. You want to use a rapid feeder. It's some type of plastic basin or wooden basin that you can put a gallon or so of feed in, and they can come up and access it. The reason why we make this hole in the inner cover as wide as we do is so that there's 2 frame gaps. So the bees can have 2 frame gaps to access it. You put that on here, they come right up through, and you might, I'm surprised somebody hasn't asked me if they need bee space up here. They do not need bee space on the top of the hive. In a natural tree cavity, how much space do they have above the comb? None, it's suspended from the ceiling, right? Yeah, they don't need bee space on top. That's all in it. They need it in other places, but not on top. All right, so you put your feeder down and you'll feed them up and you'll have it enclosed in another box. And then it comes time and they've had enough feed. You guys all pretend like there's 2 boxes. I will slide that feeder off, and I'll take my plexiglass and just slide it right on there like that. And it keeps the bees down there where I want them. And then I'll put the lid on because I don't want to add my top box and my extra insulation and my candy board until late September or early October. The reason is because they will haul your sugar out like trash. The very first time I put candy boards on, I left, I went moose hunting, I came back and I found every bit of sugar in piles in front of the hive. They did not appreciate what I was trying to do for them. So I learned my lesson. I got online and go, why'd they do that? You put it on too soon. Wait till they're not flying. That's what you do. So I come back late September, early October, and I put my candy board together. This is the infamous Huffman candy board insert. Patent not pending. I don't use a wooden inner cover anymore. I only use Reflectix. I've got a square there for feeding. I put a piece of plexiglass here when I get finished in the fall, so that when I come back and add the candy board later, they haven't hauled it all away as trash. And now it's October, it's time to add the candy. So what I'll do, I have a piece of screen that the bees can crawl through, a piece of paper on it to slow them down, and I will just slide this forward slowly, and the bees get out of the way. And I'll take my plexiglass off. And now I can install my candy board, which I make as an insert. Now, this is one piece of candy that I actually make, but that's only to hold down the paper. Now what I'll do is I've taken a piece of 1x foam, and this is form fit in here to create an insert. I don't want any wood to be exposed to the outside and leak cold. So I have this 1x foam insert that goes down on the outside like that. And I'll pour my sugar around the outside. And I don't add a ton of sugar. I can always come back and add more if they need it. This is emergency food if they run out in the winter, and they're gonna have a long winter here in Alaska. Next, and this is my favorite part of this, I put another piece of Reflectix over the top that has another piece of plexiglass in it. So I can come and look in the wintertime and see if those bees are up on the candy, and if so, how much they've eaten. Finally, I add 2 inches of foam, slide it in, and then put the lid on my poly box. So I have 3 inches of insulation on top. That'll do it. In February, if you're addicted to bees like I am, you can come out and you can pop the top off your hive and you can look at your bees crawling around eating sugar and you don't bother them at all.
What's up?
It's awesome. You can, and if you have to add more sugar, you just peel up the corner and put more sugar in there. Tom?
About half of my hives last winter, they never did come through the newspaper.
Right, right.
And about February, I could open the top of that and put my hand on the paper, and I knew if those hives were alive or not.
Yep.
There was nobody coming out the front, but I could feel the heat coming through that newspaper.
So I want to be really clear. Not every hive needs this. If you feed them up right, I would say that only about 20% of my colonies start on this sugar before March. But the ones that do often eat it all. And there's something genetically there. And so if we were like some pure evolutionary kind of adaptive approach, we would say, oh, they don't have the genetics, and so they shouldn't survive. And I'm like, you know what my favorite kind of bee is? One that's alive in May. And so this candy board is insurance. If you only have 1 or 2 hives, and they're the kind of hives that go through sugar, this is what helps them live. And I would way rather have extra sugar in April or May than dead bees in April or May, right? So that's why I recommend it. Plus I like to spy on them. Now you can do this different ways. I like to take this 2-inch insulation and cut it a little small and then just use duct tape. This is just a duct tape piece of Reflectix. And I do that because, sorry. It slides right down there and seals. And then it slides, and then I have little duct tape tabs. It slides right back out. If you don't put the Reflectix on there, it's like squeak, 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 and the bees are like, what's going on, you know? This just slides right out, easy as pie. It's awesome. Now, you could do the same thing by putting a sheet of Reflectix between it probably to get a seal on the side and then just drop it in and undercut a little bit. Those specifics aren't important. The important part is you're adding extra insulation. And last year, and this winter, there's about, 2.5 inches or so still. I'm gonna fill that up this year. My insulation strategy is gonna have a box that has nothing but insulation on it. Etienne Tardif, I think it's Etienne talks about this, R40 on top. R17 on the side is what he likes to do. Now, our weather's not as extreme as his, at least not for extended periods of time. So, but 75% heat loss, just like your house, is through the roof. So I'm gonna fill these up this year. It can't hurt. And this stuff is easy to store. Now, that is the Huffman Candy Board insert. It fits inside the hive. It fits over that Reflectix inner cover, so it seals tightly all the way around. You are not losing any heat. In fact, you're providing sugar, you're providing emergency food, and extra insulation at once. Okay? No upper entrances. Did I say that? No upper entrances. The data is really clear. The bees have to work way harder to keep a hive with upper entrance warm. You don't need the quilt box. The quilt boxes that are effective are ones that are just extra insulation. But you'll see people online, they're like trying to do 2 things at once. They put quilt box above it, and then they put ventilation above the quilt box. Well, what's the heat doing? It's like, go put holes in your roof and see if you get cold. I use Tyvek tape on the seams. The weak part on all these boxes is the seams, whether it's wood or poly. That's where it's the thinnest. So I Tyvek tape around the seams, and then, in the spirit of overkill, I give them a Reflectix sleeve. This might not fit because it might be I might have brought one that fits the nuke box. Okay, awesome. So they all look the same on the outside. All right, so now it's gonna have to be like a Dilbert cartoon where he says, if the software actually worked, this is what it would do. All right, if I brought the right sheet of Reflectix, this is what it would do. It would fit like this. That's not that big of a stretch, right? And it fits down over your bottom board. So it's sealed, it's a solid all the way around, right? I cut a little slot here. Every hive I did a little differently. But this fits, I usually, yeah, you can see I've got that taped up. That actually, since it sticks out over the front like that, it keeps the ice and snow from going in. It was very slick. That was a total accident, but it worked out great. So, and then I tie-back tape to the top box, to this candy board. Well, actually to the bottom of the candy board, so that any heat on the inside can't rise up beyond that. I know my mistake. This did fit a wooden box. That was the problem.
What's on the front?
Oh, so what's on the front there? I do this because I don't want every hive looking exactly the same, because if the bees come out for a orientation flight, they need to find their way back in. And so I saw this, might have been University of Georgia, they had all the bees in their bee lab are on this brick wall, all looks the same, but they just put a different geometrical pattern by each entrance. And the bricks were all the same, but the bees oriented to the geometric pattern. So on the front of mine, I just took some tape and I put some different patterns in front, so that when they came out for an orientation flight, they would know which one to go back into. Yeah, you're gonna get lost anyway. It's not gonna stop you. All right, so, and then tie-back tape the top. You get a tight seal, anything out there. And then, and this is totally from the Department of Redundancy Department. I add external insulation. Now, I don't do this to all my hives. So for example, I don't do this to my superior hives. Thank you. I don't do this to my superior hives. Superior hives are a little bit thicker, and I use Max. They're a little cheaper. I'm not saying Max are the hives to go. It's just what I started with. I like all my gear to match. And so, but I have all superior nukes. And, but I also have bees on a warehouse in Ship Creek, right on the inlet. What do you think the wind does there all winter long? It howls, it howls. And so I put this on 3 sides. I'm not sure I actually have to demonstrate this to show you guys how poly fits on the outside of a box, but I'll do it anyway. So basically, the reason I wanted to show you this is because duct tape is good enough. You don't have to come out and glue it and screw it and make a perfect box. If you get these edges together and you duct tape them on the outside, that'll be great. And then hold them in place around the outside with a ratchet strap. I have also put 2 hives together, so it went around and the 2 hives were enclosed in one single thing. That's, I don't notice any difference in winter survival with the 2 versus the 1. But some people swear that, like, that's how Etienne does it, he pushes them all together. I do push my hives together after this is on. It helps hold them in place, and I think it helps protect from the wind. I don't put it on the front, and I did at first. I don't think it matters. But my thinking was, moisture always condenses on the coldest surface. And so if I'm gonna have it condense on the side, I want it to condense on the front. And it just comes right down and goes out the entrance. While I'm at it, another bee myth, you've probably heard that you have to tilt hives so that the water runs out. What? What's on the bottom of this hive? Yeah, I don't think we have to worry about tilting a hive that has a screen bottom. That water's gonna come down and roll right out the side. So last thing I'll do, a couple of quick thoughts on ventilation. You don't need ventilation if you have, the latest research shows that moisture is a problem only in poorly insulated colonies. When you have a well-insulated hive, the moisture condenses on the sides, on the bottom, and it goes down. And the bees actually need it because honey is only less than 20% water, so they need that moisture from their respiration to be able to process the honey. So you don't want to eliminate moisture in the hive. You want to control where it happens, and you do that with insulation, right? If you add an upper entrance, you actually increase the moisture in the hive, which is weird because if you have an upper entrance in the winter, you see these beautiful little ice formations that come as they vent air out. But here's the problem, as they lose heat, they consume more honey. Where do you think moisture in the hive comes from? It comes from bees' respiration. And that comes from consuming honey. And so the more honey they eat, the more moisture they respirate, and the more moisture is in your hive. So it's a counterintuitive thing. So control it with ventilation. Question, where did dead bees go? Right? All right. So I used, for the last several years on most of my hives, I've used a winter shim. And they were various sizes because I just cut up an old wooden deep. But the idea was I put it underneath the bottom box, and then I notched the top. So basically you had this shim all the way around with a hole notched in the top, not the bottom where the entrance is, in the top, so that even if the bees piled up dead, they could crawl over them and get out. And I loved it because it made me not worry. I mean, I stopped messing with the ice that would build up in the bottom. Because if you mess with that in the wintertime, then you can upset the hive and they can come out and express their disagreement with you, even in the winter. And even if they don't sting you, then it disturbs them out of whatever they're doing, and 20 or 30 of them can come out and die, right? Just out of a defensive response. So, although there was 1 month, or 1 year that I got stung every month of the year, but I don't recommend it. So, last year, when I had these reflective shells that went all the way down, I didn't have enough because I went into winter with too many hives. And so I didn't have enough of the shims. And 2 of my strongest hives that had those reflective shells all the way down had fewer than 100 dead bees in March. So I'm starting to wonder if I've been treating the symptom and not the disease. And so I will probably still do that this winter with some, but I'm going to cut them down and make them smaller, make them 1 inch high maybe. That pile of bees, it's a giant pile of bees that can die, even in a colony that survives, but it's not more than 1 inch tall. And so I'll probably make one that's 1 inch, and I'll probably not do it with others, and then I'll just compare. But I think that reflective shell plus really healthy bees going into fall, that did the trick, I think. I mean, we'll know more as I find out this winter, but that's a great question. Winter shim is great in terms of you don't have to worry about, like, you're out of town for 2 weeks, it snows every day for 2 weeks, you don't care because it'll never cover that area. And the reflective shell, when it kind of hangs down over that, does the same kind of thing. Yes?
When you say ventilation is a myth, are you referring to summer as well?
Let me be clear. The idea that bees need more ventilation than a single opening is the myth. It's not like an HVAC system. So, and I'm sorry, you said?
Is that true also in the summer?
The bees can manage all the ventilation they need with about 4 inches in the summer, 4 inches by 3/8 of an inch. And you protect them from other, make it easier to defend from hornets and bumblebees and other colonies that might try to rob it. So I know some people like to have an upper entrance because it keeps the comb stays nice and pretty. I don't like that because I'm growing my own queens and they come back and go in the top and lay up the super. And I want those queens to know when they fly out of the hive that that's where they come back. That's one way there. Yes?
So I've got my first year and I've got the 1 hive. What about leaking the honey?
Okay, great question. First year, well, so that's what I did my first year. All 3 made it through. But the research shows they winter better on sugar syrup. All right, so which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Like, we think as humans there's no nutrition in sugar syrup, right? But that's the point. Sugar syrup doesn't have any solids. And if you had to not poop for 5 months, you would not want to be eating bran. Right? So, sugar syrup but, like, you would not hurt them by pulling a couple frames out, extracting them, and putting them back. You would not hurt your colony at all. As long as you fed them right away, and they didn't think they were going into dirt, they'd be fine. Yeah, so. Yeah, yes?
If you knew you wanted to move your hives across
I don't want to move my hives across the yard. So the question is, if you wanted to move your hive across the yard, when would you do that? So you've probably heard the rule, move them 3 feet or 3 miles, right? So I have read all kinds, I've never done that, okay? I've never tried to move from one spot to another. I want it to be easy on me, I'm selfish that way, so I put them in a spot where they're gonna be year round. It's not ideal in my yard, in my backyard especially. It's not great, they don't get any winter sun at all. So I always am really happy the first day of spring where the sun actually hits the hives, but they do pretty good. So, but if you're gonna move them, the people that do that say that they put stuff in front to kind of make them reorient. Yeah, and all I can say is good luck, because I've read lots of stories where that didn't work. So you need to move them.
They don't have great sun in the summer.
They don't need sun in the summer. It's winter. Yeah, so I have bees out by the airport where they don't get sun in the summer because there's all these clouds. There's always clouds. All the trees leaf out. They never get sun, but those leaves fall off in the winter. And the time when sun is important is the shoulder seasons. It's like September, early October, late March, early April, when a little bit of solar gain will create a little microclimate and let them do a cleansing flight. That's really important. So if they get sun in the shoulder seasons when there aren't leaves, I think they're good. Mine aren't. That's the way ours in the backyard are. Yes, in the back.
You don't have anything under your plywood?
Correct. I do not insulate underneath my plywood. Heat rises.
And how about a wind block at all?
That's what this does. This is on the north, and the side it doesn't face is the south. All our predominant winds, when we have bad weather in the winter, are from the north. So I think a windbreak is a great idea. If I had some other windbreak, I might not do this in those situations. Do I reduce my entrance in the fall? Yes. To what? To smaller. And I say it that way because your entrances should reduce. You should reduce your entrances as soon as the nectar flow is over, because that's when the robbing starts. So you can go from 4 inches to 3 inches in like 3 weeks, And winter, about 2 inches. So she's saying that she gets a lot of snow, and she saw that Etienne Tardif puts a piece of plywood against the front of the hive, just kind of like that. And Etienne's logic is they're not flying in the winter anyway. And that's pretty darn good logic. I keep bees in people's yards, and sometimes they do things to help. But she covered the front just like this on all 3 of them. And it worked great. But we had to get it out of there in March when the temperatures warmed up, because when you have a bunch of hives together and a solid piece of wood, the ones from the middle don't find their way out and then find their way back. So if you do a piece like this, that's a great idea. The other thing that we discovered is that we had a big snow year, in case anybody noticed last year. Getting this out was a chore. It was in there, wedged so tight. So if you do something like that, I would sort of do some maintenance and lift it up from time to time to make sure you're not facing a big problem when you finally get to it. Yes?
How does splitting the hive affect its overwintering?
That's a really great question. Splitting is a really important part of sustainable beekeeping. I want you guys all to learn how to make your own queens. I want you to go into winter with more colonies than you need. So if you only want 1 colony, go into 2. You increase your chances of getting 1 through the winter. And if you go through and you get both through and you only want 1 colony, you sell 1 in the spring. That's what you do. And you will not have a hard time selling it. So what happens though, really you just have 2 different size colonies going into winter. And I have gotten colonies through winter in 6 medium frames. That's pretty small. 60% of one of these boxes. It's a lot smaller than what people say you need. I did it as an experiment with a 3-year-old queen. They were rock stars. They made it through. So I don't recommend it. I like to make my nukes 6 over 6, so 12 medium frames of bees, which is about 1 deep. It's about the equivalent. And I like it to be full of bees. And so as long as you have managed the space right that your splits are in, they're going to make it through winter. I haven't lost a nuke in 2 years. So some of my full-size colonies didn't make it, but my nukes are doing great.
Everything that you just talked about with like your setup, the candy board and all of theirs, the same thing apply to a nuke?
Absolutely.
And specifically like a deep nuke?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. The same. It does everything that I said apply to nukes, is what you said. Nukes are the same as big colonies. That was going to sound really smart. Nukes are the same as big colonies. They're just smaller. Yeah, thank you very much. So I have queen excluders and supers on my double nukes right now. I mean, they want to grow too. And so I just took a plastic queen excluder and cut it and then kind of retrofitted it between a couple of sheets of Reflectix and put it above that second 6-frame nuke and put a 6-frame super over it. And filling it right up with honey, just like the big ones do. It's pretty much the same. The last date that I get in my hives, it's middle of August at the latest. You know, it depends on how crap. So I might tilt them up after that and look in. Like last year, I got into one and tore it all apart because they just started failing in July. It was so weird. I knew they didn't have mites, and the queen had been great before, and they just started shrinking, and they just kept shrinking. I don't really know. I mean, in hindsight, I think they requeened themselves again really late, and so they just lost a lot of brood production. But I got into them in September and took all the frames out. I mean, I almost shook them out. Because if you have a hive that's just languishing like that, going downhill, then, okay, thank you. We're almost over. It's a lot of experienced beekeepers say take your losses in the fall, not the spring. And that's smart. And I thought this was one, I mean, they were just failing. I didn't see any way they were going to make it through the winter. But I thought, oh, this is an experiment because I have a channel and because I'm curious. And of course, I never did a video on it. But instead, I shrunk them to 2 nukes. I took them from 20 frames down to 10. And they made it through winter. I was amazed that they made it through winter. So, but I tore that hive apart and pulled every frame out and moved it in September. But that is not a good idea. I only did it because of an emergency. So if you have to get in for some reason, that's it. But you should not be doing YouTube inspections in late August. Oh, where's the queen? Let's find her. I wonder how much, let's count the brood. No. Lift it up, look at your population. As long as your population is good, as long as the weight's good, you're not doing anything. We answered every single question. Hey, thank you so much for coming tonight. I am just so thrilled with so many people that are interested in getting bees, in breaking the paradigm, you know, becoming sustainable and kind of build a good community about it. So thank you very much.